Hi everyone, I'm Hsing-ay Hsu in New York City, and I'm so excited to introduce to you author Ron Stewart from Lafayette, Colorado, which is right outside Boulder. How are you, Ron?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Sing-ai, and you.
I'm doing great. There's so many exciting ideas to talk to you about today, and I think we're going to start off with your new book that you're writing. Tell us about that.
It involves a couple of characters, two principal characters, an old man who was a general in the Nazi army in Italy during World War II. Along with him, the other principal character is a woman who I refer to as a Marquesa. She's an American woman who is taken up in Italy. She and her late husband have a very large piece of land and on a river, and that became a part of the battleground. So I have two old people who are operating in different spheres. Their lives have intersected only twice, once during the war and now some vague number of years later, but let's say it's about 40 or 45 years later. She's old, he's old, they come together. He's seeking to redeem himself to some degree, and he feels that the best avenue for that might be a conversation. He just dearly wants to talk. The problem is that the Marquesa has recently suffered a stroke and is a victim of aphasia. She cannot speak at the moment. So now, how does that weigh in? In doing some research and some thinking, I came across the poem, and it's about an outcropping of rock, a treacherous outcropping on the Rhine River, and it became part of German folklore because a beautiful woman evidently was at the top of this rock, and she was combing her beautiful hair and singing a beautiful melody, and this led to the distraction of the sailors.
The Lorelei refers to both the siren, the singing woman who is really a witch but appears to be something desirable, and then there is the reference of the Lorelei to the rock, which is her physical manifestation, and then to the area of the Rhine.
The old German can't speak, but he does know something about harpsichords because he's a Jeffersonian, a Renaissance man who had some early training in music. He discovers that the Marquesa has an old, dilapidated, we might say, harpsichord that needs to be rebuilt, and he just happens to have some expertise in it. So I have the idea in my mind that the gap that will be, or the method by which the gap between these two people will be bridged, will be music. In listening to this piece that was written about this lore by FRANZ Liszt, I discovered that it opens with a interval, the augmented fourth. So we might say C to F sharp. And it was called or termed in early music the diabolical interval, having to do with it kind of doesn't go anywhere. That is, the inverse of this interval is the same notes and the same distance as the interval itself.
Yeah. Well, let me just play for everybody the beginning of the song that you're talking about. The chord consists of two tritones together, and so we don't actually hear the interval next to each other. We hear the outer and the inner, and it sounds like this. A different inversion. And so the tritone is embedded in there, but it's not immediately recognizable.
So my purpose as a writer is wondering if I can use this reference, this musical reference, to suggest a separation. And for my two characters, it isn't working at all. But maybe there's a possibility that it can.
So, I think as a musician of the tritone as either being something that is diabolical, like you were talking about in the early days, or as something that is very awe-inspiring, like kind of full of wonder, especially for kids. When we think of the Simpsons theme song.
Ah, The Simpsons.
Right? And that is a sense of being dazzled. And then also in Maria, there's something very magical and innocent, which I feel like is a different interpretation than the LISZT, that sense of doom. Or even, do you know Scriabin's Vers la Flamme, Towards the Flame? Which is about...
Yes, I recently heard it. A friend played that. Yeah, Scriabin.
Yeah, it's about the apocalypse, right? Those are your tritones, and that's about hell. End of the world. And so it's interesting that the sense of kind of being in a static moment and not moving forward or back, it can produce a whole spectrum of effects, special effects, shall we say. And then the other thing that is interesting about this tritone, double tritone chord we call the diminished seventh, or if we do it in C major and you want to play along with me at home, it can be resolved 4 different ways, and we don't know how it's going to go. In the cases of doom and gloom, it doesn't resolve. It stays there, right? But then if we wanted to transform the emotions from something desperate and hopeless into something that we can recognize, something that can move forward, it can be resolved as this, right? And that is a very classical 7/7 to 1 chord progression. We can do this, which has a darker color, and then we can do, which has yet a different association, and then we can make it happy, and then we can also make it very resigned. And so there's a lot of options, more than any other chord, in terms of how we do harmonic progressions for this diminished seventh. And so that sense of possibility is really interesting for a composer.
And as you speak, my mind is going, well, that works as a symbol as well, because, we need to know where this is going to go, this interaction of these two characters, but there is more than one possibility. There are several possibilities where it could go. Could be a calamity, of course. Could be anger that results. Could be hatred. Could be infinity, separation. Or there could be some resolution. To make things more difficult, I also have 2 other characters, female and male. The one female is the caretaker of this bedridden Marquesa. This old German brings with him his son. His son just happens to be a priest. And since the old man is looking for some redemption, he brings his son along to help him think this through, hopefully. And the priest, of course, is resigned to celibacy. However, to make things interesting, he seems to discover an attraction to this Marquesas orphan daughter. So we have this other potentially fatal attraction occurring at the same time.
I see your fascination with the tritone. It is the interval that has the most tension. Yeah, and in terms of the physical overtune series, it's the most unstable. And so I think, going back into ancient days when they talked about, the octave being pure and the fifth sounding pure, like that for them was more divine, more holy, because it was harmonious with each other. Whereas the tritone, when you tune 2 strings to that, they shake and they vibrate and they want to get out of there because there's so much tension. Sounds like your young priest here is kind of in a difficult situation that he wants to get out of. Huh. This whole judgment of what's good versus bad, it's tricky. That is very tricky. And I think what's interesting about music is it really actually frees us to go into this abstract world of make-believe and not have the judgment. I think sometimes it's easier to get people to see that multiple perspectives can coexist in music first before they're ready to admit that in life. Because there isn't necessarily good or bad. Like what is good or bad in dissonance and consonance? I mean, it depends on who you ask and when you ask it. But in terms of the musical interest in the storytelling through sound, they're the yin and yang, right? They coexist in order to tell the story. Whereas in life, I think there is a moral issue of what's good and bad. And there is a moral issue of, are we hurting each other or are we actually able to love each other?
Because harpsichord is an odd instrument. I think it has some utility for a writer because it's kind of weird. You don't really hear it very much. It kind of has the stereotypical association as being old-fashioned. The harpsichord becomes a touchstone for both the second lover of the Marquesa and now the general. There's a couple of broken strings, which just so happens to be F sharp and C. So he's going to have to find the way to repair this harpsichord to make this interval. Well, my Marquesa names her harpsichord, and its name is Lorelei. Mm-hmm. So there you have the circle completed.
Well, let me just play for our listeners a couple of the themes in the actual music. If you guys haven't heard this song by Liszt, the theme of Lorelei, the witch, the siren, is actually very beautiful. There's no tritones involved. It's very soothing. And that's, I think, maybe the kind of piece that your general is searching for. And then there's the moment of the drowning of the man. That is all over his death. And we'll wait to hear in your story what happens at the end.
Well, I do too. I'm awaiting that myself.
Do you already know? Do you already know the ending, or? Yeah.
I do know the ending. Not to do a spoiler, but I envision a resolution and I envision something of a happy ending.
Well, looking forward to reading it, Ron. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Hsing-ay. Always a pleasure.